Some moments are like a flash of lightning, illuminating the cracks in our world we pretend aren't there. For Captain Gregory Dalton, a man who commanded a $40 million aircraft, that moment came at 30,000 feet. He was king of his domain, a fortress of metal and sky. But when he slapped down the hand of a black woman in coach, he didn't see a passenger. He saw an inconvenience. He didn't know he wasn't just touching a hand, he was touching a nerve, the very nerve that controlled the finances of his entire world. He had no idea he had just assaulted the most powerful woman in the aviation industry, the unseen owner of the airline itself. This isn't just a story about a slap. It's about the thunder that followed. The air in the terminal at Chicago O'Hare was a familiar soup of human anxiety and stale coffee. It was a place of hurried goodbyes and impatient waits, a purgatory between where you were and where you wanted to be. Dr. Vienna Rhodes sat unnoticed in the stiff, unforgiving chairs of Gate C-28, her simple grey tracksuit and worn leather backpack a perfect camouflage. She was just another face in the river of travellers flowing toward their destinations. No one would guess that she wasn't just travelling. She was auditing the very current of that river. Vienna Rhodes was the founder and majority shareholder of a tech-focused private equity firm, Phoenix Capital Group. A year ago, Phoenix had acquired a 70% stake in Aerovista Airlines, a legacy carrier struggling to escape its own history of declining service and disgruntled employees. Vienna's investment philosophy was simple and brutal. You can't fix a machine without first understanding how every single gear grinds. So, for the past 6 months, she had been flying commercial on her own airline, unannounced, under her maiden name. This was Project Horizon, her deep-dive analysis into the real customer experience, from the dirty carpets at the gate to the sincerity of the smile from the cabin crew. Her file on Aerovista was already thick with observations, ticket agents who sighed with theatrical impatience, broken USB ports, the ever-shrinking legroom. But today she was focused on the crew of Flight 734 to San Francisco. Her reports had flagged this particular route for an unusually high number of customer complaints, ranging from rudeness to lost baggage. She watched the crew arrive at the gate. The flight attendants, 2 women, walked ahead. One, a younger woman with a nervous energy named Grace, according to her badge, offered a tentative smile to the waiting passengers. The other, a senior attendant named Brenda, with a face set in practiced indifference, barely made eye contact. Behind them strode the pilot and co-pilot. The co-pilot looked young, eager, and thoroughly intimidated. The captain, however, moved with an air of unearned royalty. His name tag read, G. Dalton, Captain Gregory Dalton. Vienna had read his file, a third-generation pilot. His father had been a celebrated vice president at the airline in the 90s. Dalton carried that legacy not as a responsibility, but as a crown. He was known for his technical skill, but also for a string of minor HR complaints that had been consistently handled by management, who saw him as airline nobility. He had a sharp jaw, perfectly coiffed silvering hair, and eyes that swept over the waiting passengers not as customers, but as cargo. Vienna felt a familiar tightening in her gut. It was a look she'd seen 1,000 times in 1,000 boardrooms, the casual dismissal, the assumption of her irrelevance. It was the very attitude her investment was meant to eradicate. The boarding call for Zone 4 crackled over the intercom. Vienna stood, stretching her legs, and joined the back of the line. She watched as an elderly woman, probably in her late 80s, struggled to pull her small carry-on roller bag. The wheels caught on a seam in the carpet, and the woman stumbled. She reached out to steady herself, nearly falling. Without a second thought, Vienna stepped out of line. "Here, let me help you with that," she said, her voice warm and low. The elderly woman looked up, her face a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment. "Oh, thank you, dear. These new wheels are supposed to be easier, but I think they conspire against me." Vienna smiled and easily lifted the bag over the rough patch. "They just need to be shown who's boss." She walked with the woman down the jet bridge, deliberately slowing her pace to match the woman's shuffle. They were among the last to board, which suited Vienna just fine. It gave her a better view of the crew's interactions as the final cabin preparations were made. As they reached the aircraft door, Brenda, the senior flight attendant, offered a plastic smile. "Welcome aboard," she said, her eyes already looking past them. "She needs a little help with her bag," Vienna explained, gesturing to the small roller. "Her seat is 22B. Brenda's smile flickered. "Please move along. You're holding up the final boarding." She pointed vaguely toward the back. The elderly woman, whose name was Marge, looked flustered. Vienna kept her voice even. "I'm happy to help her get it stowed. We just need a moment." It was then that the cockpit door swung open. Captain Gregory Dalton filled the doorway, his uniform immaculate, his expression thunderous. He had clearly been listening. "What's the delay here?" he boomed, his voice cutting through the cabin noise. His eyes landed on Vienna and Marge, a bottleneck in his perfectly scheduled departure. He didn't see a woman helping an elder. He saw a problem. "Just getting this passenger settled, Captain," Vienna said calmly, her hand resting on the handle of Marge's bag. Dalton's gaze was dismissive. He looked at Vienna's simple tracksuit, her unassuming backpack, and made 1,000 instant calculations, every single one of them wrong. Before anyone could react further, Vienna reached out her free hand, placing it gently on the frame of the open cockpit door to steady herself as she prepared to lift Marge's bag into the overhead bin. It was a simple, reflexive action. But to Captain Dalton, it was a transgression. The world inside an airplane is a delicate ecosystem of forced proximity and unspoken rules. One of those rules, reinforced by post-9/11 security culture, is the sanctity of the cockpit. To Captain Gregory Dalton, his cockpit was more than an office. It was his throne room. A hand on its doorframe, especially the hand of a woman in a tracksuit from Zone 4, was an invasion. His reaction was not just fast, it was visceral. "Don't you touch my cockpit!" he snarled, his voice a whip crack in the confined space. And then he did it. He didn't push her hand away. He didn't ask her to move it. He slapped it. The sound was sharp, ugly, and definitive, a loud smack of flesh on flesh that echoed in the sudden, shocked silence of the forward cabin. It wasn't a physically damaging blow, but it was profoundly violent in its intent. It was an act of pure, unadulterated contempt, the slap of a master correcting a servant. Vienna Rhodes froze. Her hand, tingling from the impact, fell to her side. For a single, stretched-out second, the only sound was the hum of the auxiliary power unit. Every passenger in the first few rows had turned to stare. The younger flight attendant, Grace, gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Brenda's face went rigid, a mask of calculated neutrality. The elderly woman, Marge, looked horrified. Vienna slowly lifted her gaze from her hand and met Captain Dalton's eyes. In them, she saw no regret, only a furious, self-righteous justification. He saw himself as defending his authority, maintaining order. "You will remove your hand," he said, his voice low and menacing, as if she was still touching the door. "The cockpit is a secure area. You have no business putting your hands anywhere near it." Vienna's own voice, when it came, was unnervingly calm. It was a calmness forged in hostile takeover negotiations and high-stakes venture capital pitches. It was the voice of a woman who had learned long ago that the loudest person in the room is rarely the most powerful. I was steadying myself, she said, each word a precisely placed stone. I was assisting another passenger whom your crew ignored. I don't care what you were doing, Dalton retorted, his chest puffing out. He was performing now, asserting his dominance for the audience of passengers and crew. You follow the rules on my aircraft. That means keeping your hands to yourself and getting to your seat. Now move it. He gestured dismissively toward the back of the plane, a flick of his wrist that was as insulting as the slap itself. Brenda, the senior attendant, finally snapped into action. "Ma'am, please, let's find your seat," she said, her tone falsely sweet, attempting to de-escalate not for Vienna's sake, but to protect the captain. Vienna didn't move. She held Dalton's gaze for another 3 seconds. She was cataloguing every detail. The slight tremor of rage in his hand, the way his jaw was clenched, the flicker of smug satisfaction in his eyes. She wasn't just a passenger being humiliated. She was a diagnostician observing a symptom of a deep-seated disease in her own company. Finally, she turned to the elderly woman. "Marge, is it?" she asked softly. Marge nodded, looking terrified. "Let's get your bag stowed." Vienna effortlessly lifted the small suitcase and placed it in the overhead bin above seat 22B. She then helped Marge into her seat, making sure her seatbelt was comfortable. "Thank you, dear," Marge whispered, her hand trembling as she touched Vienna's arm. "I'm so sorry." "You have nothing to be sorry for," Vienna replied, loud enough for those nearby to hear. She then turned and walked toward her own seat, 28D, an aisle seat further back. As she passed the galley, she made eye contact with Grace, the younger flight attendant, who looked pale and deeply shaken. Vienna gave her the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. It was a nod of acknowledgement, a silent message that said, "I saw you. I saw your reaction." As Vienna settled into her seat, the cabin door was sealed and the safety briefing began. The disembodied voice from the speakers spoke of procedures and safety, a sterile narration completely at odds with the raw violation that had just occurred. Captain Dalton's voice came over the intercom moments later, smooth as silk. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking. Welcome aboard Aero Vista Flight 734 with non-stop service to San Francisco. We're looking at a smooth ride today, expecting to be on the ground about 15 minutes ahead of schedule. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight." He sounded charming, professional, a man in complete control. But Vienna Rhodes knew better. He hadn't just slapped her hand. He had slapped the hand that fed him, the hand that signed the checks, the hand that held the fate of his entire airline. And for the next 4 hours, as they soared through the stratosphere, he would remain blissfully, catastrophically, unaware. The flight ascended, breaking through a thick layer of grey clouds into a realm of brilliant, blinding sunlight. Below, the world was obscured. Above, the sky was a perfect, serene blue. The irony was not lost on Vienna. Inside the metal tube of Flight 734, the atmosphere was anything but serene. The incident at the door had created an invisible shockwave that rippled through the cabin. Passengers in the forward section whispered among themselves, casting furtive glances back toward Vienna's seat. Sam, a young software engineer in seat 9C, who had witnessed the whole thing, was seething. He'd seen the pilot's aggression, the woman's calm dignity. It felt wrong, a gross abuse of power. He almost said something, but, like most people, the fear of being labeled a disruptive passenger and potentially being removed from the flight kept him silent. He settled for glaring at the cockpit door. Vienna herself appeared outwardly composed. She opened her laptop, a high-end but unbranded machine, and connected to the plane's notoriously slow Wi-Fi, The $60 fee was another data point for her report. As the network crawled to life, she didn't begin by firing off angry emails or calling her lawyers. Her first action was to open a blank document and begin to type. Incident report, AV734, ORD SFO. Date, October 14, 2025. She documented everything with the precision of a forensic accountant. The time, the gate number, the names of the crew members involved. She described Marge's difficulty, Brenda's dismissiveness, and the exact sequence of events leading up to the confrontation. She described the slap, the sound, the shock, the immediate tingling sensation. She quoted Captain Dalton's words, verbatim. She noted the reactions of the crew and the visible shock of the surrounding passengers. She was not writing as a victim. She was writing as an investigator. Her anger was a cold, clean fuel, channeled not into emotion, but into meticulous, damning detail. Meanwhile, in the forward galley, the two flight attendants were having a tense, whispered conversation. "I can't believe he did that," Grace said, her hands busy, but her eyes wide with disbelief. "He physically assaulted a passenger, Brenda." Brenda shot her a sharp look, her back to the cabin. "It wasn't an assault. He was securing his flight deck. That woman had no right to touch the door. You know how Captain Dalton is about the rules." "The rules?" She was helping an old lady. "You saw it. You did nothing." "My job is to support the captain and ensure an on-time departure," Brenda hissed. "Your job is to do the same, not to question the flight crew. That woman was being difficult and holding up the plane. The captain handled it. End of story. Now, are you going to start the beverage service, or are you going to stand there looking horrified all the way to California?" Grace felt a hot flush of shame and anger. Brenda had been with the airline for 25 years. She was a survivor, and survival meant siding with power. Grace had only been flying for 2 years. She had student loans, rent, a sick mother. She knew that filing a report against a senior captain like Dalton was career suicide. He would deny it, Brenda would back him up, and Grace would be labeled a troublemaker. She would be stuck on undesirable reserve schedules until she finally quit. So, like the passenger in 9C, she said nothing more. But her silence felt heavy, like a stone in her stomach. An hour into the flight, Vienna finished her report. It was 5 pages long, single-spaced. It was a precise, objective, and utterly devastating account. She saved it. Then she opened her secure email client, the one she used for all Phoenix Capital Group business. She composed a new message. The recipient was Robert Morrison, the CEO of Aerovista Airlines. Morrison was a man she had installed herself, a veteran industry insider who understood the numbers, but whom she suspected lacked the spine for true cultural change. This would be his test. The subject line was just 2 words: Flight 734. The body of the email was even shorter. "Robert, I am currently a passenger on this flight, seat 28D, under the name Vienna Price. Your captain, Gregory Dalton, physically assaulted me during boarding. This is not a complaint. This is a notification. Have a full executive delegation, including yourself, your head of HR, your chief legal counsel, and the head of airport security, meet the plane at the gate upon arrival in SFO. Do not alert the flight crew. We will deplane all other passengers first. Your handling of this situation will determine the future of your leadership at this company. L. She hit send. The email, compressed and encrypted, crawled through the satellite connection and shot down to the earth below, landing in the inbox of a CEO sitting in his sprawling office in Aerovista's San Francisco headquarters. Robert Morrison was reviewing quarterly fuel expenditure reports when the notification pinged on his desktop. The name Vienna Price meant nothing to him. But the sender's email address and the initials LW sent a bolt of ice water through his veins. Only one person used that address: Dr. Vienna Rhodes. He read the message once, then a second time. His face went pale. Physically assaulted me. Your captain. Determine the future of your leadership. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. He scrambled for his phone, his hands shaking so badly he misdialed twice. He wasn't just dealing with an angry passenger or a potential lawsuit. He was dealing with the woman who could liquidate his entire company with a single phone call. A woman who was sitting, right now, in a coach seat on one of his own planes after being struck by one of his most arrogant, problematic, and supposedly untouchable pilots. The smooth ride Captain Dalton had promised was over. The turbulence was just beginning. On the ground, chaos erupted in the executive wing of Aero Vista Tower. Robert Morrison's call to his chief of staff was a panicked bark. "Get me Sarah Connolly from legal, get me David Chen from HR, and get me Frank Miller, our chief of operations. Conference call, now, and clear my schedule for the rest of the day." Within 5 minutes, the three executives were on a frantic call, their voices a mix of confusion and alarm as Morrison relayed the contents of Vienna Rhodes's email. "She's on 734, in coach?" David Chen, the HR director, sounded incredulous. "Under an alias? What the hell is going on?" "It's her Project Horizon," Morrison said, pacing his office. "She's been doing it for months, secret shopping her own damn airline. I knew it was happening, but I never imagined this." Sarah Connolly, the sharp, no-nonsense head of legal, cut straight to the point. "Forget the why for a moment, Robert. The what is the emergency. Physically assaulted, those are her words. Do we know anything about this Captain Dalton?" There was a pause. David Chen sighed. "Oh, we know him. Gregory Dalton. His file is thick. A dozen informal complaints over the last 5 years. Arrogance, talking down to female crew. A couple of passenger confrontations that were smoothed over by station managers. His father was an EVP. He's always been considered untouchable. We had him in mandatory sensitivity training last year after an incident with a gate agent." "Clearly it didn't take," Sarah muttered dryly. "Robert, her instructions are explicit. She wants us at the gate. This is not a negotiation. We need to treat this as a level 1 crisis." "I know that, Sarah," Morrison snapped, the pressure making his voice crack. He took a deep breath. "Okay. Here's the plan. Frank, you get airport operations on the line. We need a private gate area at SFO. No press, no rubbernecking. Get SFO airport security to meet us there, discreetly. I want them present but out of the way. David, pull every single piece of paper you have on Dalton. Commendations, complaints, training records, everything. Sarah, you're with me. We're going to meet that plane. And for God's sake, nobody contacts the crew. The last thing we need is Dalton getting a heads up and trying to spin this his way before she deplanes." The corporate machinery, usually slow and bureaucratic, was now moving with the terrifying speed of self-preservation. Schedules were vaporized. Meetings were cancelled. A convoy of black sedans was being arranged. The entire C-suite of Aero Vista Airlines was scrambling to intercept a single commercial flight, all because of an email sent from 35,000 feet. Up in the air, the beverage service was underway. Grace, the younger flight attendant, moved down the aisle with the cart, her smile strained. When she reached row 28, she met Vienna's eyes. "Can I get you anything to drink?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Just some water, please," Vienna said. As Grace handed her the cup, her fingers brushed against Vienna's. The flight attendant's hands were cold and trembling. "Are you all right?" Vienna asked quietly, her expression softening for the first time. Grace just shook her head, her eyes welling up. "I'm sorry about what happened," she whispered, so low the passenger across the aisle couldn't hear. "That was unacceptable. I should have said something." "You were in a difficult position," Vienna replied, her voice kind but firm. "Doing the right thing is often hardest when it matters most. Your reaction was noted, Grace, just as your colleague's was." The use of her name startled Grace. She looked at Vienna again, truly looked at her this time. There was an authority in this woman's gaze that had nothing to do with anger or victimhood. It was a deep, quiet power that was far more intimidating than Captain Dalton's blustering rage. Grace felt a shiver of premonition, a sense that the tectonic plates of her world were shifting beneath her feet. She nodded numbly and continued down the aisle. Vienna leaned back in her seat, sipping her water. She knew the dice were now cast. Morrison would be panicking. He would be following her instructions to the letter because he was a man who understood hierarchy, and he had just been reminded, in the starkest possible terms, who was at the top of the food chain. The real test would be what came next. It wasn't about revenge. Firing a rogue pilot was easy. This was about something much bigger. Captain Dalton wasn't an anomaly. He was a symptom of a rotten culture that valued seniority over service, arrogance over accountability. He was a product of a system that protected its own, a system that Vienna had bought with the intention of tearing it down to the studs. The slap was the justification she never wanted, but absolutely needed. It was the perfect, undeniable data point. It had made Project Horizon personal, and for the entrenched old guard of Aerovista Airlines, nothing could be more dangerous. The plane began its initial descent toward the California coast, flying into a storm that only one person on board knew was waiting. The fasten seatbelt sign chimed on, and the plane began its final, graceful arc toward San Francisco International Airport. Captain Dalton's voice once again filled the cabin, as smooth and unruffled as ever. "Folks, we are beginning our final descent into SFO. As you can see, it's a beautiful, clear day on the coast. We'll be on the ground in about 20 minutes. On behalf of the entire crew, I'd like to thank you for flying Aerovista. We hope you had a pleasant flight." A few passengers in the forward cabin exchanged incredulous looks. A pleasant flight? The tension that had been simmering for hours was now a low, anxious hum. The landing was perfect. A textbook touchdown that was signature Dalton, technically flawless, utterly devoid of any human warmth. As the plane taxied toward the terminal, the usual flurry of activity began. Phones were turned on, bags were gathered from under seats, and people began to inch toward the aisle. But then, something unusual happened. As the plane came to a stop at the gate and the jet bridge began to move into position, a different voice came over the intercom. It was Brenda, the senior flight attendant. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have an unusual request from ground control. Please remain in your seats until the seatbelt sign has been turned off. We will also ask that once we begin deplaning, you do so in an orderly fashion. We have a special request for one passenger. Would passenger Vienna Price, seated in 28D, please remain on board until all other passengers have deplaned? Vienna Price, please remain on board." A murmur went through the cabin. Heads turned to look at Vienna. She sat perfectly still, her expression unreadable. In the cockpit, Dalton was frowning. "What the hell is this?" he said to his co-pilot. "Vienna Price? Who is that? Did she call in some complaint already?" He was annoyed, not worried. In his mind, it was some oversensitive passenger making a fuss, and a station manager would give her a $100 voucher and send her on her way. Standard procedure. The cabin door opened. The passengers began to file out, Their curiosity piqued. As Marge, the elderly woman, passed Vienna's row, she paused and squeezed her arm. "You stand your ground, dear," she whispered. Finally, the plane was empty, save for Vienna, the flight crew, and the lingering sense of dread. Captain Dalton emerged from the cockpit, his jacket now on, a look of supreme impatience on his face. "All right, let's get this over with," he said, striding down the aisle toward Vienna. "I understand you have a complaint. Let me be clear." He never finished the sentence. At that moment, a group of people appeared at the open door of the aircraft. At the front was Robert Morrison, the CEO of Aerovista Airlines, his face ashen, his suit looking rumpled and hastily thrown on. Behind him were a stern-looking woman, Vienna recognized as Sarah Connolly from Legal, a flustered David Chen from HR, two uniformed SFO security officers, and the airport station chief. Dalton stopped dead in his tracks. His jaw went slack. "Robert, what on earth are you doing here?" Robert Morrison completely ignored his highest-paid pilot. His eyes were fixed on the woman in the grey tracksuit sitting in seat 28D. He walked down the aisle, the sound of his expensive shoes unnaturally loud in the silent cabin. He stopped at her row, his posture a study in deference. "Dr. Rhodes," he said, his voice strained. "On behalf of the entire company, I am profoundly sorry." The name hit Gregory Dalton like a physical blow. Dr. Rhodes. He knew that name. Everyone at the airline knew that name. The mysterious, powerful head of Phoenix Capital Group, the new owner, the woman who held all of their fates in her hands. He looked from the CEO bowing his head to the woman in the coach seat. His mind struggled to connect the two realities. The irrelevant passenger from Zone 4, the woman whose hand he had slapped away in a fit of pique. The lead investor. It was the same person. The blood drained from his face. A cold, sickening dread, unlike anything he had ever felt, washed over him. He felt as if the floor of the plane had just dropped out from under him, leaving him in a terrifying freefall. Vienna slowly stood up, her movements deliberate. She looked past the CEO and directly at the pilot. She didn't look angry. She didn't look triumphant. She looked like a scientist observing a failed experiment. "Captain Dalton," she said, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute authority. "I believe you wanted to be clear about something." Gregory Dalton opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His career, his legacy, his entire sense of self-worth had just been incinerated in a single horrifying moment of recognition. He stared at the woman he had assaulted, and for the first time, he finally saw her. And in her calm, unwavering eyes, he saw the end of his world. The 48 hours leading up to the meeting were the longest of Gregory Dalton's life. He oscillated between volcanic rage and a gut-twisting fear he hadn't felt since his first solo flight in a storm. He spent hours on the phone with his union representative, a portly, perpetually weary man named Bill, rehearsing his defense. It was about security, protocol, the sanctity of the flight deck. He had been decisive, a captain making a command decision in the face of a non-compliant passenger. He clung to these words like a mantra, polishing them until they shone with the false light of justification. He was Captain Dalton. He had a legacy to protect. This was a gross overreaction, and he would make them see that. His confidence, however, began to fray the moment he stepped out of the elevator onto the executive floor of Aerovista Tower. The thick, plush carpet seemed to muffle the sound of his own panicked heartbeat. Administrative assistants fell silent as he passed, their fingers freezing over their keyboards, their eyes following him with a morbid curiosity usually reserved for a man walking to the gallows. There were no friendly nods, no casual greetings. The news of his transgression, and the identity of its victim had saturated the very air of the building. He was no longer a respected senior pilot. He was a contaminant. The boardroom itself was a chamber of ice. Cold leather, gleaming mahogany, and a vast floor-to-ceiling window offering a stunning, indifferent view of the San Francisco Bay. At the far end of the impossibly long table sat the tribunal. Robert Morrison, the CEO, looked haggard, a man who hadn't slept in 2 days. Beside him, David Chen, the head of HR, nervously shuffled a thick file that Dalton knew, with a sickening lurch, was his own. And in the center, in the high-backed chair of the chairman, sat Dr. Vienna Rhodes. She was the picture of calm, formidable power. The simple grey tracksuit was gone, replaced by a razor-sharp navy blue suit. Her hair was swept back in a severe, elegant style, and her eyes, clear and analytical, missed nothing. As Dalton and his union rep took their seats across the vast expanse of polished wood, he felt a profound sense of miscalculation. This was not a woman who could be managed, placated, or intimidated. This was a woman who dismantled things for a living. Robert Morrison cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. "Thank you for coming, Gregory. We are here to discuss the events of Flight 734 on Tuesday." "Thank you, Robert." Vienna's voice cut through the air, not loud, but absolute. She held up a hand, a simple gesture that instantly transferred all authority in the room to her. "I will handle this." Morrison visibly deflated, nodding and leaning back in his chair like a subordinate. Vienna's entire focus narrowed, landing on Gregory Dalton with the intensity of a laser. "Captain Dalton," she began, her tone dispassionate, as if she were reading a financial statement. "Before we discuss Tuesday, I want to establish a baseline. I have spent the last 2 days conducting a deep dive into your personnel file. It's illuminating." She picked up a sleek tablet, her fingers swiping across the glass. "Let's start with March 2023. A complaint from a gate agent in Denver, Ms. Alvarez. You called her a glorified ticket ripper with a power trip when she correctly informed you that the catering truck was delayed, impacting your departure time. You suggested she was too incompetent to manage a crosswalk, let alone a boarding gate." Dalton stiffened. "That situation was misrepresented. June 2024, Vienna continued, ignoring him. A mandatory co-pilot review session. You wrote that your first officer, a highly rated female pilot named Jessica O'Neill, had good hands but was overly emotional, and that her hesitation during turbulent simulations suggested a lack of natural command instinct. This despite the fact her performance metrics in that simulation were in the top 5% of all Aerovista pilots. I was providing an honest assessment of a subordinate," he shot back, his voice rising. "And then there is the matter of the passengers," Vienna said, her voice dropping, becoming more dangerous. "A first-class passenger, in August, Mr. Chen, an elderly Asian man who had trouble understanding your accent during an announcement. You were heard telling your co-pilot, on an open mic, if they can't speak the language, maybe they should fly with their own country's airline. A dozen passengers heard you. Bill, the union rep, finally spoke up. Dr. Rhodes, these are isolated, informal complaints. None of them resulted in disciplinary action. They have no bearing on the matter at hand, which is a security protocol issue. They have every bearing," Vienna corrected, her eyes flashing with cold fire, "because they are not isolated incidents. They are data points that form a clear and undeniable pattern, a pattern of arrogance, misogyny, and xenophobia. You don't respect women in positions of authority. You don't respect service workers. You don't respect customers you deem beneath you. Which brings us, Captain, to Tuesday." She leaned forward, her voice becoming a quiet, devastating weapon. You didn't see a passenger in need of assistance. You didn't see a woman trying to help an elderly lady. You looked at me, at my skin color, at my simple clothes, and your entire, prejudice-soaked database of a mind made an instant calculation. You saw a nuisance, an obstacle, someone from Zone 4 who had the audacity to touch the sacred doorframe of your kingdom. So you acted on your pattern. You put her back in her place. She paused, letting the accusation hang in the dead air of the room. The slap was not about security. It was a physical manifestation of your contempt. It was an act of a man who believes his status, his seniority, and his last name make him a higher class of human being. You are the living embodiment of the cultural rot that has been slowly killing this airline from the inside out. A culture that protects bullies, that values tenure over temperament, that sees its own customers as cargo. You, Captain, are not an outlier. You are the poster child for that culture. This is an outrageous character assassination, Dalton finally exploded, his face crimson. I have given 30 years of my life to this airline. My father— Your father is not in this room, Vienna said, her voice slicing through his anger. His legacy does not excuse your behavior. It only explains how it went unpunished for so long. She stood and walked to the window, her back to him. The tension in the room was suffocating. Therefore, she said, turning back to face him, her decision already made, this is what is going to happen. Your employment with Aerovista Airlines is terminated, effective immediately. You will be paid for your accrued time, but all unvested stock options and performance bonuses are forfeited. A full and detailed report of the incident, including your history of complaints and the video evidence, will be submitted to the FAA. I believe the term they use is conduct unbecoming of a pilot. Your license will be their decision, but I would not be optimistic. Bill jumped to his feet. You can't do this. This is a flagrant violation of the collective bargaining agreement. We will file a grievance. We will take this to arbitration. We will sue. Vienna simply looked at him. Please do. My legal team is led by Sarah Connolly. She has never lost an arbitration case. While you are wasting your members' dues on a case you cannot possibly win, I will be busy. I will be implementing a new initiative here at Aerovista. We're calling it the Dalton Reforms. Dalton recoiled as if she had struck him again. His own name twisted into a mark of shame. Yes, Vienna confirmed, seeing the horror on his face. The Dalton Reforms will be a new, mandatory, top-to-bottom training program for every single employee. It will focus on de-escalation, unconscious bias, and dignity-based service. And every time an employee sits through that training, every time a new pilot is hired, they will learn about the incident on Flight 734. They will learn about you. Your name will no longer be a legacy of command. It will be a cautionary tale. She then turned her gaze to the trembling head of HR. Mr. Chen, your department's file on Captain Dalton is a monument to institutional cowardice, a series of problems handled and resolved instead of being corrected. You enabled this behavior. You are hereby demoted from director to manager of program implementation. Your new, single focus will be the successful rollout of the Dalton Reforms. You will report directly to my office. Your performance in this role will determine if you have any future at this company. She returned to her seat and folded her hands on the table. The judgment was complete. We are done here. Bill, you may discuss the severance terms with Mr. Chen. Captain Dalton, your building access has been revoked. Security will escort you out. As if on cue, 2 uniformed security guards entered the room, their faces impassive. Gregory Dalton sat frozen, the color gone from his face, replaced by a pasty, grey shock. All his rehearsed defenses, his indignant rage, his lifetime of privilege, it had all been incinerated. He looked at Vienna Rhodes, a woman who had so calmly and completely taken apart his entire world, piece by piece, and he understood. This wasn't a punishment. It was an eradication. The fallout was not a storm. It was a climate change event. For Gregory Dalton, the world he had known simply ceased to exist. In the first few days after his termination, he operated in a state of furious denial. He saw himself as the victim of a corporate ambush, a political hit job orchestrated by a social justice warrior owner who didn't understand the realities of running an airline. He called his union representative Bill, demanding an aggressive lawsuit. He called old friends in high places, men his father had played golf with, expecting them to rally to his cause. The calls went unreturned. Bill, the union rep, informed him grimly that the union's hands were tied. "They have video, Greg," he'd said, his voice weary. "They have a dozen passenger witnesses and a flight attendant willing to testify against you. And she owns the whole damn company. There's no fight to be had here. Just mitigation." Then the video hit the internet. A passenger in seat 8A had filmed the entire incident, from Vienna helping Marge down the jet bridge to the ugly, echoing sound of the slap. The footage was grainy and shaky, but undeniably damning. Within hours, it was on every major news network. The story was irresistible. The arrogant pilot, the unassuming billionaire, the instantaneous, brutal karma. The hashtags General Slapton and Arus Aerovista Reckoning exploded across social media. Gregory Dalton was no longer a respected captain. He was a meme, a caricature of entitled privilege. Watching himself on the screen was a surreal, out-of-body experience. He didn't recognize the snarling, contemptuous man in the uniform. He saw the world condemning him, and his indignation curdled into a bitter, self-pitying rage. His lawsuit for wrongful termination was countersued by Aerovista for damages to the brand, a legal maneuver so aggressive and well-funded that he was forced to drop his case almost immediately. The FAA, under intense public pressure, suspended his commercial pilot license indefinitely. His professional death was followed by a social one. The invitations to parties and golf tournaments stopped. Neighbors who once waved enthusiastically now found fascinating things to look at on the ground when he walked past. The financial ruin was a slow, creeping tide. Legal bills mounted. Without his six-figure salary, the mortgage on his sprawling suburban home became an anchor dragging him under. He was forced to sell, trading his manicured lawn and three-car garage for a small, anonymous apartment across town. He, Captain Gregory Dalton, who had once held the lives of hundreds in his hands as he commanded a $40 million machine through the stratosphere, was now grounded in every conceivable way, a ghost haunting the ruins of a life he had single-handedly detonated. While Dalton's world shrank, the world of Aerovista began to expand. Vienna Rhodes refused to let the narrative be solely about one man's downfall. She used the intense media spotlight as a crucible for change. Aerovista didn't issue a typical, jargon-filled corporate apology. Instead, they released a direct statement from Vienna herself. "The actions of Captain Dalton were a symptom of a cultural sickness we are committed to curing," it read. "Accountability, dignity, and service are not buzzwords. They are now the core metrics by which this company will measure its success. This is not a scandal. This is a new beginning." The Dalton reforms became Vienna's obsession. She poured millions into the program, bringing in leading experts in industrial psychology and customer relations. The training was mandatory and intense. Pilots sat in simulators. But instead of practicing emergency landings, they role-played de-escalating scenarios with angry or frightened passengers. Senior managers, including Brenda, were required to spend a week working entry-level jobs, ticketing, baggage handling, cabin cleaning, to foster a sense of shared purpose and respect. The resistance was palpable at first. Grumbling about woke nonsense echoed in crew lounges. But Vienna was unyielding. Those who refused to adapt were offered generous severance packages. Many of the old guard, who saw the changes as a personal affront, took the offer and left. They were replaced by a new generation of employees, hired not just for their technical skills, but for their emotional intelligence. Grace, the junior flight attendant, became the face of this new generation. Vienna promoted her to a training and development role, personally mentoring her. Grace was terrified at first, but she blossomed under the responsibility, her innate empathy now recognized as a vital corporate asset. Brenda, after her humbling 3-month stint supervising cleaning crews, returned to her flight attendant duties a different woman. The experience had stripped away her cynicism, replacing it with a quiet, weary respect for the invisible labor that kept the airline running. She and Grace, once adversaries in the galley, developed a tentative but genuine friendship. 6 months after the incident, Vienna Rhodes walked down the jet bridge at JFK. She was boarding Flight 21 to Los Angeles. This time, there was no disguise. She was flying first class, not as an anonymous auditor, but as the visible leader of a transformed company. The aircraft itself was a testament to her vision. It was the first plane to be completely refurbished under her new fleet improvement plan. The lighting was softer, the seats were ergonomically designed, and every single USB port worked. There was a small, framed piece of art on the forward bulkhead. The changes were subtle, but they all sent the same message. The passenger's comfort and dignity mattered. As she settled into her seat, a flight attendant approached, her bearing poised and confident. It was Grace, now a lead flight attendant and in-flight service instructor. She wore her uniform with an easy authority that was miles away from the nervous, intimidated young woman Vienna had met in Chicago. "Dr. Rhodes, welcome aboard," Grace said, her smile genuine and warm. "I saw your name on the manifest. I wanted to welcome you personally." "Grace," Vienna replied, smiling back. "It's wonderful to see you. You wear the new position well." A flicker of deep emotion crossed Grace's face. "I never got the chance to properly thank you," she said, her voice low, "for believing in me. You didn't just change the company. You changed my life." Vienna looked at the earnest, capable woman before her. "You changed your own life, Grace," she corrected gently. "You showed character when it was difficult. You just needed to be in a company that knew how to value it. That's all I did." Grace nodded, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Well, we're all very proud of what we're building here. Can I get you anything before we take off?" Vienna leaned back into the comfortable seat, the hum of the cabin a peaceful, promising sound. She thought of the journey, the ugly slap, the corporate chaos, the hard, grinding work of turning a massive ship in a new direction. It had all been worth it. "Yes, please," Vienna said, her gaze drifting out the window to the vast, open sky. "I'll have a water. It's going to be a smooth flight." What you just heard is a story about more than just a single moment of injustice. It's a powerful reminder that the people we dismiss often hold a power we cannot see. Captain Dalton's mistake wasn't just slapping a hand. It was his failure to see the humanity and worth in the person before him. Dr. Vienna Rhodes's triumph wasn't just firing a man who wronged her. It was in using her immense power, not for personal revenge, but to rebuild an entire corporate culture on a foundation of respect. This story shows that karma isn't always a mystical force. Sometimes it's a direct consequence of your own actions, delivered by the very person you underestimated. It's a lesson that true authority is earned through character, not demanded by a uniform. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to let us know. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell for more true-life stories of karma, justice, and the hidden power that lies within us all. Thank you for listening.